here. I love you all.
Hello and welcome to the Scannain Podcast, your weekly podcast looking at the week in film news, Irish and international. I'm your host, Darren Mooney, and joining me are
Jay, Luke, and Ronan.
And this week we're going to talk about what we normally do. We're going to talk about the top 10, the new releases, and the week in film news. But we're going to start with what we normally do. So, Luke, what have you watched since last we talked?
Now, I haven't been on in quite a while, so I thought I'd kind of dip in and out of some stuff that I've been watching over the last couple of weeks. I'm going to start with Flash Gordon.
Yeah.
Not to bring the tone down on the podcast right from the beginning, but is Flash Gordon the horniest movie of all time? It's certainly up there.
It's certainly up there, yeah.
There's an energy coming off of Flash Gordon.
There really is.
It's right up there with Top Gun.
But, you know, like, it's kind of remembered today as like one of the all-time camp classics,
yes,
which it absolutely is. You know, it's scripted by Lorenzo Temple Jr., who was the kind of the writer for the Batman TV show in the 60s. So it kind of carries that similar kind of...
Although he also like wrote Day of the Condor and stuff like that, and Parallax U. He's got a really interesting
yeah, no,
CV.
he's more than just a kind of a joke merchant. And in fact, he disagreed with that kind of comedic tone for this film. That kind of more came from Dino De Laurentiis, the producer, who kind of... De Laurentiis was a fan of the comics and wanted a comic tone for the film, which he held the rights to forever. And the list of directors that De Laurentiis was looking for before the film got made is insane. Like, he was looking at Fellini, Sergio Leone.
Oh, they're different films. Fellini's Flash Gordon.
There was at least one other.
I mean, De Laurentiis did a whole bunch of stuff in there. Like, he was also involved in, was it Dune, if I remember correctly?
Like, he has a very long track record as a producer, and he's kind of remembered today as for flops, but he worked with everybody. Like,
well, the Silence of the Lambs and Hannibal, if I remember correctly, as well. He was involved with Thomas Harris stuff as well.
Going back a long way, but Flash Gordon's amazing. I love Flash Gordon. It's so funny and so. But even aside from that, the production design is amazing. Yeah. You know, the sound design,
very
everything.
Physical as well, like
and
effects and stuff. Looking
at that screenplay, there's a lot that even serious blockbusters could learn today from Flash Gordon in the way that it's set up, because, you know, there's all these kind of mad sci-fi characters and factions and scenarios going on, but everybody in it has a very clear motivation. It is always moving forward in a very clear and coherent way, and it builds to a very literal climax where Flash penetrates Ming the Merciless with his giant rocket ship. So it works on an ironic level, but it also, you know, it ends with its biggest action scene. Other modern movies could learn a lot from Flash Gordon, and it will always be worth a watch, I think. Other stuff that I've watched, I watched Destroyer, and I've kind of been listening over the last couple of weeks to reactions to that. I didn't like Destroyer really at all. Like, I can't fault the filmmaking with it, you know, the kind of the visual burnout, like, of it's Arizona that it's a...
Is it not California? I thought it's...
Well, wherever it is, it looks like really hot.
Yeah, it's that sort of dried out golden.
It looks like a brain where a fuse is blown. And, you know, that's obviously very intentional. It works very well, and Kidman is fantastic in it. I just have a lot of issues with the screenplay of it and kind of the places that it takes it. It's, even apart from the twists and turns and all that, it is an overly grim, very miserable film, you know. And in service of what, you know, it kind of tries to inject some kind of heart and pathos in it, but way, way too late. And I wasn't a fan at all. I also watched a short film called Ghost Train. This is directed by Lee Cronin, who's The Hole in the Ground.
Oh, yeah,
coming in
which is coming out next week.
And
screening next week.
It's coming soon.
Yes.
But Ghost Train is really good, and having seen The Hole in the Ground myself, it's interesting to watch a director's kind of ambitions and ideas come forth in kind of a bigger way successfully. Like, this is very much an example of a director improving as he's going into features. You know, it's got a kind of a Stephen King kind of vibe. The effects for a short are very impressive, and his work with child actors stands to him when he goes into his feature. Yeah, there's other stuff that I watch, but I could talk about them for hours. Some of them are very insane, so I might leave them there. Shrek Retold is a podcast into itself, so I might save that one.
Shrek Retold is having seen the trailer for it, it looks completely insane.
What
Does-
number in the Shrek series is this?
Have you not
Shrek
heard about
Retold.
this?
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. I might just say what it is, and then we can
yeah,
find.
yeah.
Shrek Retold is a shot-for-shot remake of the original Shrek, made by 200 different filmmakers in a variety of different styles.
What? So there's animation, there's claymation, there's live action,
There's-
there's mumblecore.
There's drawings that are just shot on a camera.
Why Shrek?
There's live action. It was made for a Shrek film festival.
which is a thing that exists, by the way. Yeah.
Of course.
Look, we'll be here all day, Darren.
But it,
Remarkable.
like again, like the trailer is worth kind of seeking out because
Okay, yeah.
it seems like I was very interested in this as a concept, and it was like I watched the trailer, it's like I'm not sure I'm ready for
Yeah.
this.
It's really good.
Okay. So you can seek it out, and it's available. Is it available on YouTube?
It is available in its entirety on YouTube, yes.
So
This
yes,
is
and
the
legally.
end point of remix culture, isn't
Well,
it?
yeah.
This is where we end up.
Yeah, it's like one of those art house sort of statements. I'm
Yeah.
surprised this isn't playing the film festival. You know.
Mm.
All right then. So Jay, what have you watched since last we talked?
I've got a couple. One I watched was Support the Girls, the Andrew Bajalski film, which Rebecca Hall,
Regina Hall.
Regina Hall, sorry, is kind of favourite to win Best Supporting Actress, I think. Or
Is
in
she
the
over
mix.
King? I thought King was.
Oh, is she? Okay.
I think King got the nomination.
Oh, did
yeah.
she? Shit, sorry, mixed it up.
Well, don't worry. It was like that. I remember tweeting that during the
Yeah.
nominations and being like, "Let me just double check that." to be
yeah,
sure."
yeah. But Support the Girls is great. It's set in a sports bar with curves, as its title called, Double Whammies.
I wonder what that could possibly be
And
evoking.
she's the kind of manager who's kind of like a surrogate mother to the young girls that work there, and it's basically a day in the life of that place and the people in it, and it's really, really good. She's a real empathetic and kind of respect to give characters advice and stuff, and the exhaustion that takes over a course of a day. And sportcasts are brilliant. I really, really like that, particularly Hayley Lou Richardson, who we talked about was in Columbus a couple of weeks ago. She's
Yeah.
really, really good.
She had a very good couple of years.
Yeah,
Actually.
yeah, she has, and she's very, very good in this. And there's one of the great final scenes that I've seen in film the last few years, which I really, really loved. It's one of those kind of low key gems that's kind of, I've seen people talk about it and really like it, but it seems to have slipped under the radar somewhat in terms of people talking about it.
I don't know. I think it garnered a lot of attention.
It
considering,
did in
like,
the
it's-
States, but it doesn't seem to have come across this side of the thing yet.
Yeah, it hasn't had a big push here.
No.
But I mean, I suspect that the fact that it's based in a Hooters bar, which is
Yeah.
a very American phenomenon.
Oh, yeah.
Even if you call it Double Whammies, it's still very clearly Hooters.
It's a good title.
It's
I
it's a much
I'd rather
wittier.
go to Double Whammies
It's a much
than
wittier
Looter,
title than
flavours.
Hooters.
Yeah, it
to
is,
be
yeah.
honest.
But I know, like, and well worth seeking out if you find it. One of the others I watched was Lucky, the John Carroll Lynch film with Hardy and
Directed
Sutton.
by John Carroll
Carroll
Lynch
Lynch
and
of the
starring David Lynch, which
Oh,
is
yeah.
one of the interesting combinations. And
yeah,
the
this-
last film of
Well, I think he made one more after it's more part on it, but it's essentially a swan song.
Yeah.
Certainly his last lead role when he was like 90, I think, or 89 when he was filming it. And this is really remarkable. It's extremely low key in that kind of older man kind of has this kind of routine where he bops around this kind of small little kind of town and kind of gets angry, gets annoyed, makes jokes, falls over, does all sorts of things. But essentially, the kind of looking death in the eye essentially is what's going on here, and the kind of his own kind of impermanence in the world, and the fact that he's going out of it soon. And it's kind of builds around that, and there's kind of little nuggets of wisdom. There's anger there. There's kind of a desperation there as well. But then there's a sort of acceptance. And again, one of the sportcast Lynch is very good actually. The thing about Lynch on screen these days is I almost expect him to shout Gordon Cole style in everything I see, which is really it's like, oh no, he's just playing somebody normal. He's not shouting. Okay, that's fair enough. Like, and it's kind of a surprise, but he's very good, and it's a great swan song, like, and it's extremely moving. And Hardy and Stanton, like, is one of the great actors, and yeah, he'll be missed very much and very good. And the last one I mentioned is the Miseducation of Cameron Post, which is a Desiree Arkoven film. Her previous film, which is Appropriate Behaviour, I quite liked.
Yeah,
and so I look forward to this. And it seems to have got pretty good reviews. But it's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. It's good. It's the kind of story about a young girl that's sent to a gay conversion kind of centre, and the kind of story. And it's well filmed, well acted. There's nothing out of place. But again, after mentioning again, But I'm a Cheerleader, which is a much funnier, smart, and I think smarter take on the same kind of material. I would seek that out, which is on Mubi in the States still, if you have access to that kind of thing. It's a much, much better film, but this is good.
On it.
Yeah, I would recommend. I think
Get
you're
a
wrong.
movie on, if you will.
But Miseducation of Cameron Post is good. I wouldn't put you off. Chloe Smith is very good in it. Sacha Lane is very good. It has its heart in the right place, but it's just a touch dull. And there's even that kind of dreaded Sundance moment, which I had a horrible feeling was coming. You know, the one,
The one where they
wacky
dance,
one.
or there's
yeah,
it's gonna
yeah,
be a
you
GIF.
can-
It's
this one's
gonna
a song, but and it's
always a song.
It's
isn't
always
it?
a song. It's like, why do American films do this? Why did you do it? I lost count.
Little Miss Sunshine is the reason why they do it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
pretty much.
it's
I
extremely
love Little Miss
depressing.
Sunshine.
So do I. I like it a
It's
lot.
been
But
13 years.
yeah, exactly.
over it.
Try a new thing.
Yeah.
But it's this one. But it's worth checking out. I wouldn't be completely sold on it, but not bad overall.
Alright.
So that's me.
All right, and Ronan, what have you watched since last we talked?
I got a couple things after talking last week about Hong Sang-soo. I know Jay had watched, I think, Right Now Wrong Then.
Yes.
I've seen a couple and I've never totally warmed to him, so I dived in and I tried another. Not that one, but Nobody's Daughter, Haewon from 2013. And it kind of just kept me in the same place I am with him. You know, I have a certain... I don't quite warm to his material. He's got a very distinctive style where you'll have like a long shot that'll
Then a
zoom
zoom.
in
I
to a
don't like that
two-shot,
zoom.
then possibly zoom to a close-up. It's very jarring. It's unexpected. But I think there's a real disconnect in the way he writes his scripts. You know, he has very structured things. Many of his films have the same thing playing out twice, you know, playing on some sort of contrast between comedy and tragedy, same way to tell two stories. But it's also combined with a looseness. Characters get drunk. They have a really sort of naturalistic dialogue. And I think it's just really jarring. The two never work together for me. This did not correct things. I will try Right Now Wrong Then before I definitively say he's not for me.
People
but
say it's his best one. If that doesn't work, you can probably
Yeah,
forget
yeah,
about
pretty
it.
much.
I liked it, but I get the feeling that they're quite similar in terms of their approach.
It's always kind of enjoyable, but it always feels very slight, and that's part of the point, that you find kind of profundity in the everyday. But I get a little bored usually, even though they're about a very long generally. Then I saw An Optical Poem from 1938, a short film by Oscar Fischinger, which it's sort of abstract. Visual music is what he called these, literally just sort of patterns and colours set to music in this case. Sort of existing classical piece. The really weird thing here is that it was funded by MGM. They gave him a lot of money. He had just fled the Nazis to just sort of do something quite weird, and it's very weird by studio standards. And it's strange to think at the end of the 30s, when they had pretty much codified everything that they were doing that would make them money, that they poured something into abstraction. And the result is amazing. I think as a result of it, he went off and had a hand in the abstract sequences in Fantasia, but disagreed with Disney and wasn't credited in the end. It's only about 5 minutes long. It's just really returning cinema to the sort of uniqueness that it had almost gone away from at that point. You know, not dealing with story at all, just playing around with sound and visuals, and it's just really, really pleasant viewing. That's on Mubi at the moment. Then a 35mm print of Red Dust at the IFI last night, presented by Megan McGurk of Sassmouth Dames. This is great. I've always said that I never really got the attraction of Clark Gable. I realised that I should probably have watched earlier 30s Clark Gable. He is looking very good here. As is everyone. Jean Harlow is absolutely fantastic as a prostitute who arrives in sort of this little rubber harvesting company. A new employee arrives under Gable's watch and brings his wife unexpectedly, and a love triangle ensues. Couldn't really call it love square because the husband is such a non-entity, and it's really interesting in gender roles that he is contrasted with Gable, who often has an open shirt, you know, his chest is bursting out. And then you get the contrast between the sort of high society lady and the prostitute played by Harlow. But it does some interesting things with that. It's sort of going along prescribed gender roles all the time, but it does do some interesting things. It's extremely 1932, and its sort of outlook on Africa, which is not so good.
You have to take it with that.
Or sorry,
The Rough with the Smooth, yeah.
It's a lot of fun, but the 35mm print, which was very old, I was talking to Megan afterwards, and she said that actually some of the seedier stuff had been cut out of it. It was obviously edited after the pre-code era for exhibition, and so the kind of interesting stuff that makes it a lot of pre-code fun is gone.
completely lost.
Yeah.
There's no copy of it anywhere.
Well, no, there is, but this particular
not
print,
this
which I
print.
think came from the BFI,
Ah,
but it was
interesting.
an absolute hoot to see it with an audience.
Yeah.
You know, Gable behaves like a dick, and a woman slaps him, and shrieks went up in the audience. It's really great participatory stuff. I love seeing all these old films with the crowd. And then another movie one I caught last night, which is I hadn't heard of before. It's by Olivier Ducastel and Jacques Martineau, French filmmakers who kind of broke through with Paris 559 a couple of years ago, which is kind of best described as Before Sunset but with AIDS. It's this walk between a couple who have unprotected sex, and then one of them reveals to the other that he's HIV positive, and they sort of go to a hospital, and it's this walk through Paris in the dead of night. It's a really, really interesting film. This is an earlier film from them back in 2003. It's found footage style, and it's really interesting that before, just after Blair Witch Project, essentially, before we got to the point where we all know what
The
found
saturation
footage films now look like and what they do, it sort of plays on your expectations of them, which is partially watching it many years down the line and partially them kind of anticipating where this technology would go. It does something I should say it's a drama. It's not a horror at all, but it's a coming of age tale that does some really interesting stuff with your expectations and is a sort of really good Bildungsfilm in that regard. Well worth seeking out.
In terms of myself, I saw just a couple of films. I actually saw very few this week. Rewatched The Sting, the 1973 Best Picture winner, situated precisely between Godfather Part 1 winning Best Picture, Godfather Part 2 winning Best Picture, which is probably not something that's done it a lot of favors. But what's interesting about The Sting is how it is at once very much a new Hollywood production. It's Hill directing, it's Newman and Redford starring, and it's got that sort of like grimy nostalgia for 30s crime in the same way as movies like The Godfather, but also like Chinatown,
Bonnie and Clyde,
and all that sort of stuff that you associate with it, while being much more nostalgic and much less aggressive in terms of its deconstruction than a lot of the contemporaneous 70s films. It is now, to be clear, there is a headshot, there's a graphic dead body, not reasonably graphic dead body on screen at one point, but generally speaking, it's a relatively bloodless film, which makes it entirely fascinating. It's shot in the style of a 30s film. I think Hill argued, for example, he didn't shoot extras on the street sets. All the streets where characters are wandering tend to be empty and abandoned because that's what they look like in 30s films that he's sort of emulating. You have a lot of the wipes and stuff like that, a lot of the language borrowed. And it's kind of interesting to see that sort of like cusp of like 70s new Hollywood sort of style with like naturalism and sort of that approach there contrasted with a very 30s style, no muss, no fuss, these are good criminals sort of approach to things. And it's kind of fascinating. And I think it holds up relatively well. It watches very well. I think it was Leonard Moulton who wrote that, it's the rare film that's for everybody. And this is pretty much for everybody. It's one of those, it's an interesting Best Picture winner as well. It's very hard to contextualize in the like 70s when you're getting stuff like, for example, The Deer Hunter and stuff like that happening.
Serpico was robbed that year.
But
I like this thing.
But yeah, it's a very interesting film to watch in that regard as well. In terms of other stuff I watched, I rewatched The Kid again. It's on track to be my most watched film of 2019.
What a
so
world.
that's very exciting.
It's a good choice.
It's a very good film. It's very easy to watch again and again and again, as I've discovered. And then Guardians of the Galaxy, I rewatched, which was an interesting watch going back to it. It is probably one of the better Marvel Cinematic Universe films, while still, again, like all of the Marvel Cinematic Universe films, being beholden to the rhythms and patterns of it. In particular, watching in hindsight, it's very obvious when you're watching the MacGuffin setup with these, what is this Infinity Stone? That is exactly like every other Infinity Stone. This may be of use later on. That sort of stuff. And the weird 9/11 sort of climax, which I didn't really gauge at the time, but coming back to it, it's very obvious where you have these like planes falling down on cities as women and children flee, dust rising and people screaming as like the entire climax is lots of little ships hitting a city as one giant ship tries to hit a city. And it's really disconcerting, and it's kind of interesting that like at that time we were almost so numb because you were getting stuff like Man of Steel being an obvious example, but even stuff like the original Avengers sort of recreating 9/11 in superhero cinema and blockbuster cinema. But going back to it now, it's like, even the one that's set in space with precisely one scene set on Earth and a talking raccoon is still reliving this cultural trauma. Other than that, I think it holds up relatively well. I think it holds up much better than a lot of the surrounding Marvel films because it is actually about something more than throwing toys together, in that it's a story that's fundamentally about a child dealing with grief and the idea of escaping into a fantastical wonderland.
That opening scene, though, Jesus.
But again, like I think that works relatively well in a Luke talked about like blockbusters needing more straightforward storytelling, and Guardians of the Galaxy doesn't have that because it obviously has all the Thanos stuff, all the crossover stuff. But yeah, I think that like Guardians of the Galaxy at least has a clear emotional through line where it's very clear what it's about.
Very clear. That's no doubt about that.
And like no, but you say that like as if the problem with modern blockbusters is that they're too streamlined, they're too clear. They're not. They never double back.
Too much. Like at the beginning, it's just too much.
Ronan the Destroyer could learn a lot from Ming and Clytus.
Yeah.
I had totally forgot that my name was used in a Marvel movie. There was a whole thing where people kept making jokes at me. I was like, can we move on, please?
As a cosplaying Smurf, no less.
Considering that Guardians of the Galaxy is Chris Pratt's big Hollywood blockbuster star coming out party, I think this week's news means that Guardians of the Galaxy is a film that has been historically recontextualized more than once, and it's only been 4 years, which gives you an idea of
how turbulent
the last few years have been.
Indeed,
That's very true.
Sometimes a talking raccoon is just a talking raccoon. But yeah, okay, and that's about it. So let's move on to talking about the week in film news. So, big news this week, the BAFTAs.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I know. Awards season, it never ends.
They happened.
And yeah, they definitely did.
Somebody gave some gold to Olivia Colman. The world is an okay place.
Which is good. And it's kind of great that, again, we talked about this in the podcast, like, the idea that Olivia Colman came from nowhere is slightly frustrating, but it's good to see her finally
it's very
being
much
acknowledged.
a sort of American industry narrative.
But I mean, again...
She'll be best
makes
newcomer
sense
next year.
She hasn't,
but yeah, so...
Sorry.
But yeah, in terms of other stuff, I mean, Roma is sort of now soaring ahead.
It's a lock. It's never best picture. I think
pretty much like it initially looked like it was going to be Roma versus Star Is Born. Then it looked like it might be Roma versus Green Book,
or Bohemian Rhapsody.
Didn't Green Book do really well at the DGAs though?
Yeah. I like how this is what we're dreading. It's like the inevitability, but I suspect we're going to have a conversation about that possibly later. There may be sort of some context for that.
It has, in fairness, the needle has moved a fair bit in the season, considering back at the premiere of Stars Born in Toronto, I think it was sort of almost deemed a lock for Best Picture at that point, and everybody sort of agreed together that that's what's going to happen, and then things moved, and it was for a while, will Roman do it? Will not. So there is at least a bit of drama if that's what you're into.
Yeah, I mean, like it is. Again, people were talking a couple of weeks ago about the joy of being, of having a season where like nothing was, sort of set in stone, and now it kind of is, which is
it generally solidifies though. When you get near the thing, like you have a good idea what's what.
I mean, some of them come down to the wire, like Warren Beatty's, particularly at this moment.
Indeed.
But yeah, in terms of Oscars and awards season, is it worth discussing the chaos unfolding at the Academy?
It's a farce.
You're in trouble when Russell Crowe is like, "Look, I'm not going to sugarcoat this."
Russell Crowe's tweet was terrific,
Really
but he's dead right, and he's right not to sugarcoat it.
No, I know, but I like the idea of when Russell Crowe is not sugarcoating. It's like, it's like
you've got a problem.
It's all a bit bizarre. I mean, the whole idea that he couldn't get a host for starters seems bizarre to me. When there's literally thousands of people he can employ.
Poison chalice.
Nobody
comes out of hosting
Billy
the Oscars
Crystal
better.
has done nothing better to do with his time than hosting. He might as well drag
Do you
him out
remember
of
the
grave.
last time Billy
It
Crystal?
doesn't matter.
They
just
can't
get
wake him
somebody
up.
Yeah, it's probably
It's past his bedtime. But no,
He's
I mean,
only mostly dead.
well, you heard the again, it came out during the week that Anne Hathaway was like talked into hosting the Oscars by James Franco, which seems particularly cruel given how that particular hosting gig went.
That was not good.
Yeah, she still is not entirely sure whether or not
The
it's
whole thing with the Oscars being given during that breaks is bizarre.
Yeah, well, I mean,
absolutely bizarre.
They're arguing now that like what they're going to do, and this is really weird. So yeah, the big controversy is that the Oscars announced that several categories, including editing, cinematography, and what's the third one?
There's makeup or one of the other ones.
Hairstyling, and I'm not sure. Was it live action short? I think was
live action short as well. Yeah, but they're basically going to be given out during the commercial breaks, and what they're going to do, and when everyone's like, whoa, like obviously cinematography and editing. Maybe a little bit
fundamental,
to the art of like making a film, and then the Academy sort of clarified in inverted commas in the same way that they clarified in inverted commas that Best Popular Film wasn't happening. That what they were actually going to do was they were going to give them out during the ad breaks and then cut them into the show that was broadcast live, which is very strange because it implies that like the cinematography nominees are sitting so far at the back of the Kodiak Theatre that it takes them 4 minutes to walk up to the podium.
Absurd.
But it's just
that clarification and the fact that the Oscars always overrun and always are meandering and overwhelming. The fact that best editing is what's being cut, it feels like a prank.
If any ceremony should appreciate the power of a good editor, you would imagine the
what do these
Oscars.
guys
canon
even do?
scenes that are excruciating every year, like that he patronised the
awful
people to
jokes.
combine. Yeah,
There's so much
You
you
can
could
cut
cut
it.
out of these.
And I
shits.
mean, you have the 15-minute host monologue.
yeah. Cut it
Just-
to 5.
Just no,
Well, not
just
this
cut
year.
it. Just cut
Cut
it.
it down.
just nominate popular films and award popular films. That's
No,
really
no,
all
stop
that it takes.
No, it doesn't.
No, it does.
That's not
Like,
all that it takes.
It is all that
Have
it
somebody
takes.
that hosts is not an idiot and give the awards to people that deserve them and then go home. That's all it is. And everything else is irrelevant.
Historically speaking, if you want people to watch the Oscars, you give them
I don't care.
Oscars.
I'm not even going to watch the Oscars this year. I just don't.
make better popular films.
Yes.
Whoa!
Thank you, Ronan.
There are some terrible popular
There are
films.
some.
There are some great
There are
ones.
also some terrible Sundance films. Too.
There are,
Like, I mean,
absolutely.
you know,
We are all
many
agreed
terrible
that there
There
are
are
terrible
lots of terrible
films
films in
everywhere.
general. No matter where you go, Surgeon's Law, 90% of everything is crap.
But I think the whole outcry in Guillermo del Toro has been pretty good on this, talking about, these are the foundational aspects of cinema. If you cut these, you're sort of cutting the essence of cinema. It just hits home. Like, is anybody surprised that the Academy isn't terribly interested in the art of cinema? It's just the business. This is the reality. They're just putting it out in front of us.
Well, I mean, again, the whole point of the Oscars from the Academy's point of view is not to honor the best and brightest in film. It's not even to honor the best and brightest of themselves. It's to earn 90% of the revenue for the activities that they conduct during the rest
Yeah,
of the year.
Soderbergh gave an interview I read today where he said that they do the preservation work to do. It's a huge part of archiving and stuff. The money that comes in from it.
It's like with the Hollywood Foreign Press. They do a lot in saving old prints from falling
Did you
into
hear
it.
Soderbergh talking about his speech? The Academy had given out this little info pack about how to keep your speech
his was given
concise.
as a-
And the example that they gave was Soderbergh's speech from 15, 16 years ago, and Soderbergh was asked for comment on this, and he's like, "Yeah, no, I was drunk.
Yeah,
I didn't expect to win."
He's got hammered thinking somebody else going to win, then just going to stumble upon. He said, "I couldn't trust myself to name
So that's
all the
the
people that's there to
secret.
be thanked." So that was the whole point of it.
In terms of other news then, because the Oscars are next Sunday, so I'm sure we'll be talking about them again. But in news closer to home, the Irish Film Institute has unveiled its plans for 2019, which are full of a range. There's the usual stuff happening. There's the big 4 film festivals. There's the French Film Festival in November, the IFI Family Festival in August, the Documentary Festival in September, and the Horathon that takes place over
And
the
more
Bank Holiday
importantly,
weekend.
the IFI Open Day.
Yes, which is always
Film
a
Christmas, as I like to call it.
I've never managed to make it.
My
But
God, Ronan,
I'm
this
gonna
year, though.
make sure I'm in the
Yes,
country this time.
I believe that people are queuing already, even as we're
Yes.
recording this. But yeah, no, there's a whole bunch of stuff there. They're celebrating the work of French Robert Besson as
Yeah,
well.
season,
They'll be showing the Trial of Joan of Arc and Au Hussard Balthazar as well, in a season called Memory on Film. There's a whole host of really great stuff. There's
And they're refurbing the screens 1 and 2.
that'll be interesting.
Well, I really hope they fix the seats in Screen 2 because they're excruciating.
I
They're
quite like
horrible.
Screen
I get a
2.
pain in my
Screen
neck.
2 is
It's
lovely.
great.
The
The seats are
general
terrible.
layout, they need to change the seats, and
The
they
seats are
need to
dreadful.
get the emergency exit sign to a position where it's not shining directly on the screen, please, if you're listening. Thank you.
I filled out a survey. I've told them this on numerous
It's
occasions.
very upsetting.
It is.
Air conditioning and screen.
But it's great.
That's-
Yeah.
It's a very hot place.
Well,
We love you,
it's so hot
IFI,
right
but
now.
come on,
It is literally a hot spot. No, we do love the IFI.
We do,
The
we do,
IFI is
actually.
fantastic, and they do a wonderful work.
The IFI gets a lot of my money.
Yeah.
And they will continue to. No,
Regardless of what they
Yes.
do.
no matter how hot I am in there, I will keep shelling it.
But yeah, so their Hidden Figures season, which is returning, will be focusing on Dorothy Arzner. The only female director in Hollywood in the 30s, apparently, according to this, who launched the careers of many of the era's finest talents, including Katharine Hepburn. And they're also doing their 3rd Dark Skies science fiction season, which will be headlined by, and Jay, I know
I'm
you've
not saying
already
you're gonna
booked
say a
tickets.
word.
You've
I have,
already
yeah,
booked
have.
tickets to this 70mm screening of James Cameron's Terminator 2: Judgment Day.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Say nothing, Jay.
When is the IFI Shrek Film Festival?
And are they
Call it, Luke.
And are they commissioning their own?
I'm not taking my calls.
Luke's on a block list.
But yeah, in terms of other news, actually, the IFI also announced they're doing their adult education course in the evenings, which is something they do every year, which is very worth doing.
Kicking off with Deep Throat?
Uh,
No, not that kind of
real
education.
mature.
No, sorry.
Real mature. but okay.
I would totally go to that season, though. Just to say. Yeah, you know,
think we all would.
Yeah. Emmanuel.
Lifelong learning is very important.
Yes.
Let's program it, lads.
Necromantic in there.
There you go.
Classics.
And can we refurbish the screens after that, please?
Darren. Oh dear. You want to take it next level, didn't you? My God.
Wait,
all
I'm the
next
one
week.
who I'm the the one who crossed the line there.
There'll be a dog-friendly screening.
But yeah, okay, so fine.
Sorry. cut
They're
that out.
doing
That's-
they're doing their biannual evening course.
Yes.
This year, it's Exit Through the Cinema, which focuses on, and I'm sorry to disappoint you, Jay, British cinema since the 1980s, which includes
that's
screenings, including Lynn Ramsey's Ratcatcher, which
is Lynn
very
Ramsey's best film, in my opinion.
very beloved on this podcast.
I haven't seen it.
It's great.
Well, now you have an
The
opportunity.
whole thing, though.
Yeah, that's really annoying, actually. If it was individual ones, I'd can't see it.
Once off, because I'm very, very rare when they announce these series that I know I'm free every single one of the nights.
Because it's Wednesday. Sorry, it's consecutive Tuesdays from March the 12th running through to April the 16th. And screening there, they'll have My Beautiful Laundrette will be launching with Dr. Jenny Karlstein. Then the following week, it's Ratcatcher with Ruth McHugh lecturing on that. 28 days later, with Dr. C. Barber talking about, okay, fine. Take that, Dr. C. Barber.
I'm sure they're fine.
Robinson in Ruins with Rod Stolman. Iona with Justin McGregory. And Lady Macbeth, which is an interesting and one of the more recent editions, with Dr. Ruth Barton talking about it as well.
Very good.
That's a really good selection, actually.
It is indeed. It's
really good spread there.
6:30 every Tuesday. And if you are sort of interested in exploring British cinema since the 80s, that's probably very worth seeking out. It costs €83 and €78 if you have a concession as well.
I suppose no Mike Lee, actually. Just as a matter of interest.
Is it possible to argue that he sort of predates that to a certain extent?
No, TV does, 70s, but I think 80s mostly cinema.
All right, because I was kind of thinking if you are doing sort of screening from like the 80s, you probably want to look at influences since then. Anyway, let's move on to fine. Let's move on to everybody's favorite part of the podcast, the top 10.
Yes.
At number 10, it's Can You Ever Forgive Me?
I've seen this. I really liked it. Yeah. The one kind of shining light in this kind of this wearying Oscar season has been Richard Grant's kind of procession to Best Supporting Actor, which I think would be quite deserved. He's very kind of he's doing stuff that he's done before. Well, I think because
isn't he one of the favorites? There's a narrative of long overdue nomination.
The Oscars, no matter about the merits of the films or whether they're that, because the Oscars are in the end a
self-congratulatory. Yeah.
Well, no, because they're a schmooze fest race, and because they're
he's definitely doing
publicity race, and the Grant has been. He's been putting the work in on that front. He's playing it very well. And he's got the performance in the film to back it up. And Melissa McCarthy, as well. There's, sometimes there's this thing where these comedic actors go in for the more serious role. You're kind of Will Ferrell-y kind of things.
Steve Carell in Welcome to Marwan.
Sometimes they come off and sometimes they don't. Melissa McCarthy is a very natural fit for this. It's not that kind of jarring, look at me, I'm doing it kind of performance.
She's very good.
She's very good. The performances are great.
Low key, I would say.
Yeah, and the whole film is, and it's kind of it's got that kind of sardonic tone that matches the person that it's about, and very very worth seeing.
I quite liked it. I didn't like it as much as I thought I was going to like it, which was kind of disappointing. But, I still think it was good.
I thought it was maybe a bit gentler than it could have been, particularly when you're looking at that particular lead character who does seem very acerbic and who does seem very kind of pointed, and the movie seems very gentle and soft, and it never, now to be fair, it never gets in the way of its performances. I think its performances are where the heart lie.
Yeah.
But I was kind of wary of it for that reason. At number 9, and I'm sure that this will pass without any controversy whatsoever, it's Vice.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I saw Vice because we have to watch the best film nominations because we have to see them. Apart from Rhapsody, we do. That's the thing. So yeah, I watched Vice. I'm not the biggest McKay fan in terms of him being a quote unquote dramatic director.
You argued Talladega Nights.
Talladega Nights is the best comedy of the century, but that's two different issues. That's mostly because of Farrell. But anyway, and John C. Reilly, who was also amazing. But I watched Vice. I wasn't the biggest fan of A Big Short, so I was kind of a little apprehensive. And I'm glad to say it really lived up to my my apprehensive feeling. I thought it was utterly dreadful. And I hadn't got much expectation. It really, really got nowhere near my expectation. It was appalling. It thinks it's extremely smart and perceptive and political, and it's not. It has essentially Saturday Night Live performances of Trump level,
And production
Alec
design.
Baldwin, Trump level kind of performances. And in fairness to McAdams, or Amy Adams and Christian Bale, they do try. They really do try, and they're up against a lot. Poor Amy Adams. Good God.
Amy
God
Adams
help
does
her.
great work.
She's
And it's
a great actress.
role.
God help
Anyway.
her. Then there's the Michael Moore quote unquote funny bits, which are not funny and not good, and not satirical and not really relevant or have any point. And there's so many targets scattered all over the film that it doesn't know what it's trying to be. It has no idea what it's trying to be. And so many misjudged scenes of utter stupidity that I find it
gets off to a
incomprehensible.
very bad start because like the first 5 minutes or so are completely unnecessary.
Yes.
Vice opens with this kind of like
Monologue about how we're all bored out of
okay,
our
sorry,
heads.
I've forgotten even about that. That wasn't even my point.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, no, it starts on a sour note with it's too cool for school,
Yeah.
based on a true story.
We really
kinda-
fucking tried. God, do me a favor.
You
Once I
can,
saw
you
that,
can, you
it's
can
sinking
hear the
feeling.
sunglasses being put on and the skateboard wheeling away. Yeah, no, that happens, and then you get this flashback to Cheney in his younger days drink driving, and it's like this is your introduction to the character, but they do it again 10 minutes later, and the scene after that scene is when Amy Adams' character lays it all out in terms of character motivations and their relationship. So
You
the
have to do
first one
something.
was completely unnecessary. Like,
It doesn't establish anything.
it's
Oh,
it's a really sloppily put together film. There's so many like rabbit holes that it goes down so half-heartedly and unnecessarily. Like I like The Big Short, but The Big Short's issues are so amplified in this because McKay got away with it.
Yeah, he's like, I can do what I
And-
want. I've got power to do everything.
And
No, no.
people, it's like when a child tells a joke. You laugh. Maybe the kid's delivery was funny, but it was still not a great joke. But the next time they do it, and they do it, and they do it, it starts to get a little bit wearying. One day Adam McKay is going to realize that documentary is a thing that exists, and his mind is going to be blown, because I can't deny that there are things in Vice that I learned, things that I didn't know
That
about
Wikipedia will
this.
deliver to
This
you
well,
within 5 minutes.
but even the angle on it, like the it is smarmy and condescending, but there are different aspects of it where I was like, this is edging towards insight or interesting things, or like I say, things that I didn't know, like the focus group kind of stuff with
The
the
tested
with
with
Iraq
the
War.
what about climate change?
Yeah, so the war wasn't polling well because it was unfocused, and then when they
Focused it,
focused it on a particular country suddenly, and
which explains a lot.
that was very much the case. But
Listeners cannot hear Jay's face.
It's yeah.
but even the
You're missing it.
even the goodwill that it builds up in that scene, torpedoes later
I
on.
mean, something like Wag the Dog, which did it far smarter about kind of war and how people perceive war and how media kind of are involved in war.
I don't get on well with films that are starting from a position that you, the viewer, are an idiot, because like, why am I hearing that? if you like, I hate that, and this does it even more than The Big Short.
Alex referenced last week when he was talking about this, the scene whereby Shakespeare makes a really unwelcome appearance. That, whilst horrendous and terrible as he made the point, I think was preceded by a scene of such incomprehensible stupidity that I'm still having trouble believing it exists.
It's the one where he's brushing his teeth.
No. I don't know, because some people on the podcast haven't seen it, Ronan.
Indeed.
So I don't want to be explicit about it, but it's to do with credits.
Oh, I quite like that.
Actually,
I really love that.
My
Um,
God, that was so. Oh,
I wish
good
the film
Jesus,
had that
I
energy a
hated
bit more.
Hated it so much.
Sorry,
so much.
I'm imagining the moment from Zoolander where it's like, this movie thinks it's too cool for school. Well, I've got news. It's not.
But it thinks it is. Clearly thinks it is. Mackay thinks he's doing one of the great 21st century satires. And,
where
and he's not.
where I thought that I was landing in it, and we talked about this online during the week, was that as I say, I picked up a few bits from it. It was mostly okay. Then it gets to the last scene where Christian Bale looks
Turns to the
directly
camera.
at the
Oh my
camera
God.
and tells you, because you're such an idiot, what the movie was about. Like even the on the nose imagery before that, I was like, it actually works because it's set up.
Okay.
But this was terrible. He's literally looking at the camera and telling you to sum
What
up.
the movie's
this
about.
is where we're
And
at.
the post-credit sequence.
And then it hits credits, and I was like, oh, that was kind of a sour note.
And then you
And
stay in your
then
seat.
Oh, which some of
There's
us didn't see.
another sour note
Yeah.
where they go back to the focus group.
That's
and
horrifying.
Now it's trying to be even more current.
Meta and self-aware.
This was
commenting on
this
itself.
was this was added in. This wasn't in the original screenplay, I'm sure.
Yeah.
It's all very SNL, very current references about making America great again and blah blah blah, and then it cuts to the people conducting the focus
Oh,
group,
God.
and they're these teens, these young people on their damn phones that can't wait for the next Fast and Furious movie.
Again, you say that, but all of these are
'cause
references
it looks
to 2016.
and
I mean, to be fair, Lit had its moment when it appeared in a Dunn Store's Christmas ad.
This film is dog shit, and I'll never watch it again. That's all I got to say.
I
about it.
really liked Vice. I
It's
suspect it will be
dreadful.
the controversial Darren top 10.
It
pick
won't
at the
even
end
be in
of
my
the year.
top 1,000.
I know, laying the gauntlet down. But don't worry, I'm sure we'll come back to an equally controversial
God,
decision
I'm
later
angry.
on.
Sorry, go on.
Don't worry, we all have our vices.
We
Jay.
do indeed.
All right, at number 8, it's Mary, Queen of Scots.
Still haven't seen it. I probably will catch it at some point when at home. I would suspect rather than the cinema. But
It's
I've heard mixed
yeah.
things.
I
Mostly-
wish it were
mostly
better.
Negative.
I really, really wish it were better. Because again, there's a gap in the market for that sort of thing.
Yeah.
At number 7, it's Glass.
Ditto, haven't
Has
seen it.
anybody here seen Glass?
seen this?
I've seen Glass.
You've seen Glass.
Wow.
Woo!
Okay.
That's a ringing endorsement.
Glass is in an unfortunate position as a film because it's the kind of film that you watch and it makes you feel like I wish I was watching
Anything
other
else?
films.
Unbreakable.
I wish
for
I was
example.
watching Unbreakable. When I watched Split, I mostly didn't like it. I found it was tonally quite off. But I remember coming out of the cinema cackling with laughter and glee because of the
That
very last
closing
scene
shot,
of it,
yeah.
which was incredible. I phoned friends to tell them the whole movie, specifically so that they get to and then Bruce Willis. But everything that I was ignoring or too excited to look at that moment, which is these two films don't go together at all, comes crashing to a head when you get to Glass.
Yeah.
Now,
Would you say that it
Shyamalan-
shatters?
it does. It does. The illusion of what I thought I was going to get. And the film is cracked, so there's another one.
Sorry,
But,
that made me a pain.
But Shyamalan is he gets dismissed very easily, and there are different reasons for that.
Listeners can't
some warranted,
hear
some
Jay
not.
raising his hand.
But he is a visually... He has a particular visual style, and there are visuals in Glass that are worth seeking out, and different things that he does that are actually, I would say, worth seeking out. The color scheme when you get to the hospital section of the film is quite interesting, and when they do some of this, a lot of the problems with this are as well as because it's kind of been superseded by a different superhero movie context compared to Unbreakable. But the way this approaches the big blockbuster stuff, like the big fights between different superpowered characters, is actually quite visually interesting. There's a character, there's a camera rather strapped to Bruce Willis's head while fight scenes are going on, or there's a fight scene where two characters are in a van and the other characters are fighting outside, and all the action is taking place inside the van. It's kind
You're
of
getting, like,
rattling
impacts and
around, and
shaking,
you're getting the
yeah.
impact and stuff. And this, there's some of the fight scenes are being seen through CCTV, and that is connected to what the actual story is. Like, there is a light still on in Shyamalan's home, but these two films don't go together. It's a mess, and yeah, very strange film.
It's a Glass act, eh?
Watch it at home, I'd say, because
yeah.
then you can bail if it's not working.
At number 6, it's The Mule, which so far has taken €379,000 at the Irish box office, which is quite impressive.
we've been talking about I've not seen this, but we've been talking about the whole Oscar race and things falling in and out. There was a very, very brief moment in the Oscar race when people were like, man, Bradley Cooper's going to get nominated twice over for Mule and A Star Is Born.
There was the moment when he was going to get 4 of the big 5 nominations, baby. He was going to be our generation's Frank Capra, where he'd get a Best Picture nom, a Best Director nom, a Best Actor nom, a Best Screenplay nom.
Going to be our Orson Welles.
Yeah, I mean, imagine living in the world where Bradley Cooper is the avatar of cinema.
No.
And it's kind of weird that, I like that. I'm not sure if I like or I dislike that he was honest enough to say, yeah, kind of a bit disappointed when they didn't read out my name for Best Director.
I don't think I like that. It's your first film and you didn't direct it very well. Sit down.
But I kind of admire the honesty of it.
I can understand where he's coming from because of the other nominations that the film has got, and
you
because
expect to be swept up in the wave.
Yeah.
like he, but he is an abrasive personality. But on a human level, I can understand his ambition and the disappointment that he would feel.
Yeah, and I kind of admire the honesty of it. Again,
the problem with the honesty of it is that at the same time he said, "I never expect to just get anything." Come on.
Because
You've
they
just
never
said
give
two
it to me.
opposite things, Brad.
The Mule is an interesting film. A very, very interesting, very strange.
3:17 to Paris, interesting, or good Clint Eastwood movie, interesting.
Oh,
contentious.
Somewhere around sort of like the Gran Torino, except nobody's figured out that like Gran Torino can't work today to the extent that it sort of almost worked in 2008.
Okay, the first one then.
It didn't work in 2008.
Kind of, sort of. Yeah, there's a moment where, Clint Eastwood saves a Mexican character through the power of racism, which is quite strange.
Cool.
There's a moment where he helps a sort of an African-American couple to sign the road, and he's like, look at me helping a couple of Negroes. And they're like, well, we don't really like that word. And he sort of looks at them and almost at the camera as if to say, kids these days, huh?
This is as far as Clint can get, I think, on this. Like, he's 148 years old. So, does he sing?
He does.
So okay.
He does. There's a moment where he rides across the country followed by a bunch of like bloodthirsty Mexican cartel assassins who have bugged his car and are listening to every move that he makes, and he sings "Ain't That a Kick in the Head" with Dean Martin, and we cut back to the bloodthirsty Mexican cartel assassins in the car behind him singing along as well. It's a fascinating and endlessly fascinating film. There's a scene where two characters threaten each other with machismo while Clint Eastwood's in the background of the shot applying lip balm. It's a very odd piece of cinema.
I've always been fascinated by Clint. This is the only one of his features I haven't seen of something like 40. But he's always had a really odd relationship to masculinity. He's really good at interrogating it, yet not good at undercutting it in his performances in some ways. There's a pretty famous story about how in Letters from Iwo Jima, where they had a sort of dying Japanese character near the end, they digitally inserted a tear in the edit to make it look a bit more profound, his dying moment. And I think in Gran Torino, possibly, Clint turned to his editor and said, "You know that thing you did before? A tear? And I get one of those." That's Clint Eastwood in a nutshell. Like, let's digitally add a tear.
Rather than crying myself.
Yeah, because he wouldn't cry.
Yeah.
I mean, crying is fine, but he wouldn't cry.
Yeah, just to be entirely clear. Again, this is a movie where Clint Eastwood plays Jimmy Stewart as a failed man whose family has fallen apart as a result of his commitment to work, but also engages in not one but two separate threesomes. It's a very odd piece of film. I kind of liked it. I'm not sure it's a good movie.
I feel like maybe on his deathbed, Clint Eastwood will reveal one way or another like what the whole deal was. his entire body of work. I mean, like, Ronan's exactly right. This is the guy who, like, he directed The Beguiled and cast himself in the main role.
Irresistible sex object.
But you watch it and you're like, okay, what are we saying here, Clint? Where are we going? Which way?
Yeah. Every which way but loose, apparently.
Hey.
At number 5, it's A Dog's Way Home.
I still haven't seen this, I'm sorry.
But don't worry, we may or may not have a new release that'll get you very excited, Ronan.
No.
I know.
He's wagging his tail as we speak.
No. At number 4, it's Alita Battle Angel.
I've seen this.
Yeah,
Good
so
man,
have
Luke.
I.
Taking him for the team. Darren.
Yeah. It doesn't feel like a 2 hour and 2 minute film.
2 hours and 23. Okay, because I don't think I tweeted this, but I wanted to. Robert Rodriguez literally wrote the book on economical filmmaking, and this film is 2 hours and 23 minutes long, and it cost $200 million.
Good God.
To be fair, a certain amount that's probably inherited from Cameron. But yeah, you talked, like, I was thinking when you were talking earlier about, like, straight line blockbuster filmmaking and simplicity.
This is what I was talking about.
This is exactly what came into my head.
This is incomprehensible.
This is a movie where the lead character takes up, like, rollerball professionally twice.
Yeah. I remember after
She takes it up.
She like fall out and then go back?
Yeah, she just like loses interest. So she's doing it, and then she like loses interest, and then the rest of the plot happens, and she's like, "Oh yeah, by the way, I should probably get back to that."
That just sounds like Rocky 2.
There's a moment where
I said out loud at that point, no. After you're over an hour in, and suddenly a character has something that they want, and Alita's response is to help you get the thing that you want. I'm going to take up rollerball or whatever the hell.
murder
Like,
ball.
no, it's too late for this.
No.
You can't tell me this is what we're doing at this point in the film.
And then
the film goes on
for another hour almost.
and we still don't reach the point where it's like this is what the movie is about. And then in the last scene of the film, we can go back and talk about other stuff, but in the last scene of the film, she's vanquished some foes, but has been confronted by the bigger evil that's kind of overseeing all.
Literally, yes.
And she goes back to rollerball because that's how she's going to get, I don't know, the money to fight
No, I
this
think
guy.
she gets elevated.
All that stuff was incomprehensible, Darren. But she's like, right, I'm getting ready to play Thunderball. She cuts a tear in half with a glowing sword. She goes up to play rollerball. She points her sword up at the sky, which is where the evil guy is. And then the movie ends. I was freaking out about this.
And it's great because
You're not getting another go at this. I'm sorry.
There's so much extraneous material in there. And it's like, yeah, let's have her take up rollerball twice. There's another moment at the climax of the film where she has a love interest who gets in over his head and gets in a situation where he's in mortal danger, and she saves him. And then not 10 minutes later, he manages to, despite having just been pulled out of mortal danger in a way that like physically and emotionally crippled him, gets himself back into mortal danger. And she has to try and save him again in a way that's just really, really frustrating. There's a whole bunch of stuff like that. There's a moment where she becomes like the world's littlest bounty hunter for 5 minutes because she's convinced that she can talk to these like bounty hunters whose defining attribute is that they're completely selfish and in it for the money, and get them to help her family out of the goodness of their hearts because Robert Rodriguez wants an action scene.
But okay, I will try to give Robert Rodriguez something here because I think what he's trying to do here is to recreate the anime kind of plot structure. Yeah. This isn't the problem with this film, but the approach that he's going for is that it's not following the beats of a film.
Yeah.
In terms of its plot, it's following the beats of a manga book or an anime, where it's like this is where this episode ends and this is where this character is at, and then we're introducing this character and all that. But that even in a film that's this long, it's completely meandering and completely incoherent.
It's actually funny because one of the things that I mentioned, like after I reviewed it, one of the comments that somebody left there was like, "Wow, this actually seems like somebody made a manga or anime movie."
The way that characters have thought bubbles, for example, in manga, that's actually, like, again, to give them something, that's actually kind of recreated on film pretty okay here, but it's just...
And, of course, the eyes of the protagonist and stuff like that. And...
Yeah, which after a while I was actually okay with, because, you know...
Yeah, well, it's intentionally in the uncanny valley.
Yeah, but as a visual effort, you know, they've clearly sunk a ton of money into making this big mad world, and
well, because that Ghost in the Shell sequel wasn't going to make itself.
But this could be Ghost in the Shell or Ready Player One or any number of kind of these big budget sci-fi disasters of the last couple of years, and you wouldn't notice. Like Ready Player One could break out in the background of this at any time, and you wouldn't know. Yeah. And there are scenes that look really expensive, and there are scenes that look cheap as hell. To go back to Flash Gordon for a second, in terms of characters and stuff, how you introduce a character, particularly in a genre story like this, matters, because you need to know like what their whole deal is, why they're there. Flash Gordon does that really well with every single character. I think 3 times in this film, important characters are introduced because somebody bumps into them in the street.
Yes. Particularly Ed Screen's character, who literally walks into the frame menacingly and walks out. It's like, who's
And
that?
again-
And like, you don't even get a line of summary. It's just not even like a he'll be important later. It's like, oh, he's just there.
And again, he comes back later in a scene that will work completely fine as an introduction.
Yeah.
You didn't need the first one at all. Would have saved us a few minutes.
Well, I mean, there's the entire opening half hour, which consists of Alita reduced to little more than an exposition machine. What's this? What are those? What does that do?
What's
Where's
an
that?
orange?
What's that? Yeah.
What's chocolate?
Yeah.
What's murder ball? Or a disaster in pretty much every way. The other right. I got 2 more
Okay.
bits. Okay, first of all, the casting in this is a complete waste of time and a complete waste of money.
Yeah.
After you get past the 2 leads who are kind of young and starting out, and they're at, for what they've got, they're doing okay.
I'm not sure about him.
He's not good. But everyone else is too good to be in this.
Far overqualified. And again,
Jennifer Connelly,
yes,
Ed Screen,
and Marshall Ali.
Yeah.
And again, this
even
is
Christoph Waltz.
Yeah. Well, Christoph Waltz is doing what Christoph Waltz does
okay.
now.
Christoph Waltz was the kind of the main point I had on this. This is the kind of character in movies like this that the people like the dearly departed Dick Miller should play.
Yeah.
This is what character actors are for, because all Christoph Waltz is there to do is to just dump exposition and these bizarre pivot points, and this is where the movie is going now, onto you. Whatever the merits are kind of overrated or whatever about Christoph Waltz as an actor, it's a complete waste of time for him to be here. Jennifer Connelly is completely checked out the whole way through. There's maybe 2 minutes where she's explaining her motivations, 3 or 4 or 9 hours into the film, where it's like, oh, she's trying here. She's turned into a brain in a jar about 2 minutes later, though, so don't worry about it.
That's not a metaphor, by the way. That's a literal what happens. And then Marshall Ali, which is in that weird situation where because the film is structured, as you pointed out, as a film designed to lead to sequels, Marshall Ali is basically put in the thankless role of having to fill the narrative space where a villain would be.
He's the character in the first volume of a manga.
Yeah.
He's the completely irrelevant.
That's it
antagonist.
exactly. And
he's literally a puppet, but I don't even know who the other guy was.
Really? Do you want me to tell you who it was?
Sure.
Ed Norton.
Oh my god.
What?
Yeah.
And yeah, sorry, just finally, because there have been quite a few of these films in recent years. These
set up sequels
these very expensive
Valerian was
kind of
another
genre films that are driven by visionary, not in the sense of quality necessarily,
but
although some of them are better than others.
Vision.
Yeah, these kinds of films, and they've pretty much all been critical disasters or commercial disasters, or both. This, Valerian,
Jupiter Ascending.
Jupiter Ascending is one.
Jupiter Ascending was good fun.
I enjoyed it.
Jupiter Ascending at least was fun.
Yeah,
Unlike
it was fun. Yeah.
Like, I mean, I would argue the issue with this,
the one with the city on wheels,
Mortal Engines.
Mortal Engines, which
Peter
I actually
Jackson's,
kind of liked,
which he
but
didn't actually direct.
was never going to make any money.
Well, that's the issue.
And all these films and all their problems and all their bizarre confidence that they're going to get all these success and love and sequels, it all just makes me appreciate Fury Road as the miracle that it is all the more. I feel like I'm going to wake up one morning and find out that Fury Road made $2 million and was hated by everyone.
The entire world. But I mean, that's the thing, is that you talk about like the creator-driven stuff. The weird thing here is that it's caught between two stools, where you have what Cameron wants to do, which is like, yeah, anti-capitalist fable with a strong female lead, and she has a big gun, and it's all about taking down the system. What Rodriguez wants to do, which is, yeah, but she's also hot, and she goes to bars, and there's dogs, and like races and stuff.
Yeah, she's meant to be like, what? Like,
she gets the body of a 13-year-old, and then they put her in a grown woman's body where she grows breasts. The camera focuses on breasts as the nurse says, well, I guess she's older than you thought she was, Doc. There's a moment then she goes and meets her boyfriend and says, oh, I'm much more tactily sensitive now. You're like, ugh. It's,
yeah.
I don't want to see this film ever.
But again, she's introduced as this sort of like hit girl type character. This character from like, was it Leon, for example, to pick another one? You know, the stereotypical.
Born Sexy Yesterday.
That's it, exactly. Or even, but but even stuff like, say, in Logan, you have like Laura in that. The idea of like the weird, like the young woman who can kill, and that
Stranger
sort
Things.
of that. Yeah, that's sort of like. But even if they're not overtly sexualized, although she is very much here, it's still that sort of strange fetishization, because, like, what if this innocent girl was not so innocent? Which is really uncomfortable when you take it in aggregate.
Yeah, it's kind of mind-boggling that the old director of Old Valerian there didn't do this one too.
Oh, well, he did it
Probably-
with
he's
Leon.
probably-
He already got there.
He's probably kicking his heels.
Damn it, if only. All right, at number 3, perhaps the hottest take of the week. It's Green Book.
Stop it, Darren.
Just saying, just so we're clear, Jay, who has hated pretty much every Best Picture nominee that he has seen so far. Green
Except for
Book.
Black Klansman.
Green Book, which is controversial to say the least.
Yes.
Maybe not particularly sort of like welcomed and sort of included and sort of like considered to be one of the best Picture nominees in years. The two of them combine, and what we end up with is...
It's not bad, actually. So Green Book, it's odd. But I mean, the story is pretty inspired by a true story, I think is how it's our true friendship. That's what it's called. And it's the Tony Lip driving Don Shirley around the deep south.
We do know
in the
that this
60s.
wasn't inspired by a real friendship, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So, yeah. It starts off unpromisingly. Viggo Mortensen starts off in a kind of where Giuro del Mio Day type of stuff, right? And that's kind of awful enough for your Italian, I imagine.
And with the hair gel and the
yeah.
makeup, actually almost makes it look like
it's not
cartoon
gaudy
character.
levels of madness, but it's initially certainly it's extremely disconcerting.
Hey,
And
oh.
the big family, oh, and all that, right? So you get a bit of that. He meets Don Shirley, who is Mahershala Ali, who is terrific in this.
Yeah.
And little by little, I think it's probably because he's interacting with Ali, Mortensen settles down and actually comes quite good in it, which I was kind of surprised by. Either I got used to him, I got deadened by the feeling of it, or
Beaten into submission.
or
by
else
his Italian
he
accent.
actually kind of settles it down a little bit and reins it in somewhat and works quite well. It's extremely familiar kind of setup and story. It's quite obvious what's going to happen in relative terms. There are problems. There's some really unfortunate scenes that don't work. That Darren has alluded to, the big scene a few weeks ago.
I'm not black
That's
enough,
the one, yeah.
and I'm not white enough, and I'm not mad enough. Jay, what am I?
What am I indeed? And you know it's going to be a big scene because it was raining.
It's raining, and they get out of the car.
That's the only reason you ever do that is for big scenes.
Yeah.
It's Darren's pointed out again. That's like 25, 30 years ago. This kind of thing would fly.
It would have been a great, it would have
And
been the best movie about racism made in 1993.
all of those things are absolutely right, and those things are absolutely fine. The major problem is that Peter Farrelly hasn't got the chops to pull off something like this in real terms. I don't think.
I think if he'd been given a stronger script,
I
like
think
he's
if he was a better director, though.
He's a perfectly competent mid-tier
This
forgettable.
is a McCoy thing, though, isn't it? It's like stick to comedies, lads. You don't really know what you're doing.
I mean, again, I don't like. Again, it's competing against Driving Miss Daisy. I don't see this being that much worse than, say, Driving Miss Daisy or like.
I know, I'm not saying it's
or
not.
any of the Ron Howard Best Picture nominees or anything like that.
I enjoyed a more than
like
Ron
this.
Howard film,
like
weirdly. But there you go. But
what? Wait. Okay.
Ron Howard, would he steer into these kind of waters?
No, he'd be
would-
smart
no,
enough.
no,
He'd be
God,
smart
no,
enough to.
he'd stay away from it. But the performances are great. The story, as it travels along, is okay. It's entertaining enough, taken aside from the scenes that shouldn't be there in real terms. And I kind of found myself enjoying it. It's kind of affection enough between the two characters, which I liked. I liked their relationship. I liked their kind of conversations. Again, outside of the things that shouldn't be in the film, really, or should be in the film in 2019. But it's a little
I'm
tone
blacker
deaf.
than you are.
Yeah, and but there's stuff there around those conversations and around. Mortensen's character doesn't need to be what he is. The whole kind of black guilt that Mahershala Ali's character Don Shirley feels about not being able to identify with kind of say popular musicians like Sam Cooke or whatever,
Or even when he
Little
goes to the
Richard and
motel,
stuff
for example.
like that stuff there, that kind of self-loathing kind of thing is really interesting. And again, with a better director, would have worked tremendously well as a film without adding the Don Mio guy
with
into
a
it.
that's
you know?
it. With a director who's interested in that story,
interrogating that story.
as opposed to
'Cause-
like the prism through which he
Yes.
makes Tony a better person.
Yeah,
and therefore-
exactly. Like there's a better film in there,
Yeah.
but because of Ali and to a slightly lesser extent Mortensen, I still want to watch that film, even though I'm aware it's not very good. even though it's not very bad, it's not quite as offensive
No, like
as the reputation would
like,
suggest.
To be fair to it, it is much better than films like The Blind Side,
It's
and I mean,
it's
and
trying
The
to be a little
Help
better.
and stuff like that. And
It's
again,
just-
like
it's-
that sounds like damning with faint praise, but you remember that The Blind Side and The Help were Oscar-nominated films
Yes.
about what, a decade ago, if even.
if that.
Yeah, like I
No,
mean,
I agree, and it's trying to be a little even-handed, and it's trying to do things right.
Yeah.
It just misses tone, and it misses certain points where you go, leave that alone. Let's not do that. But it's okay. Like, I mean, it's not the worst Best Picture nominee. I mean, we all remember Darkest Hour and a horror show of that, and
I mean,
various
Bohemian
other films.
Rhapsody
Bohemian,
is
well,
out
I've
this
seen
year,
that, so I won't. But like, I mean, there's like it's I have rated the same as The Favorite on Letterboxd. So there, take from that what you will.
okay, this is Jay's The Favorite.
Yeah,
What we're
indeed.
taking from this. But yeah, all right then. In terms of other movies, at number 2, it is How to Train Your Dragon: The Hidden World.
I didn't see the second one. I liked the first one quite a bit.
Me too. The second one is diminishing returns somewhat.
I preferred the second
Oh no,
one.
no.
Okay,
No,
well,
no,
fine.
no.
And
No,
some
no, no.
They had Kate Blanchett with the budget, baby.
Yeah, indeed.
And also then at number 1, another animated film, The Lego Movie 2, the second part, which is not doing as well as it needs to
I've heard
internationally
mixed
and in the
things,
US, which
though.
is weird.
Just the weird kind of really positive reviews, and then some are like, yeah, maybe you shouldn't have left it alone.
Probably the Batman one probably kind of.
Because of
Well,
slow
Ninjago.
momentum.
Nin-
Yeah,
the Batman
Ninjago
one
They
is
probably
brutal.
overplayed their hand between this one
And
the
well, I mean,
the
it's been
last one.
5 years since the last movie was released, and in that time, you've had the Lego Batman movie, which was
5 years.
yeah, I know we are so old, Ronan.
that was in my top 10 of the year. It came in.
It was in my top
loved
10
it.
as well. This one won't quite make it. I enjoyed it a lot. I think it does a bunch of clever stuff, but yeah, it lacks the sort of like original punch that the first one had. And it's playing with its cards turned up. Like, there's a moment where, like, they're talking about how they have to get together to stop Armageddon. And there's a moment where when the character goes, oh, our mom gets in. Really? And you have that level of self-awareness that runs through it. But again, I think it does some interesting stuff, particularly with gender and particularly with the idea of a teenage brother and a younger sister trying to figure out how to communicate to one another and how to understand one another and how to make peace with one another. While also, and also doing some interesting stuff in terms of like outlook about the world as it stands. You know, everything is awesome as a sort of a sing-song in 2015 doesn't really carry over as a sing-song in 2019.
Yeah, because things are clearly
Because
not
things
awesome.
are clearly not awesome. There's
Yeah.
quite literally a big show-stopping musical number. Everything's not awesome.
Yeah,
But it's about trying to navigate that and trying to understand
Alright,
that as
fair
well. And I
enough.
think it does some interesting stuff within that. In terms of then, so up to the upcoming releases, what's in cinemas this week? The big one in terms of Ronan, that I'm sure Ronan will love, is the Queen's Corgi.
No.
What?
No. My love for dogs does not extend to royalty. I am an avowed
But the
nationalist.
dog isn't
Good man,
royal.
Ronan.
The dog is what?
The dog isn't royal. It's just owned. It can't control.
Yes, it is.
It has no choice in the
Corgis.
matter.
They sit on fluffy cushions. They're royal.
Also, it's like animation doesn't count. It has to be a real or stop motion dog, which is animation. But
so specific.
so specific. Oh, I love a stop motion dog.
Also out this week, and actually out as we're recording this, is Happy Death Day to You,
Good title.
which is
I haven't seen the first one. You've recommended it to me, didn't you?
I
I'm
quite
still
like
not
the
too
first
sure about
one.
it.
Again, like this is the thing where it's a January and February horror, so the standards,
Yeah.
unless you Get Out, are generally a bit lower for them. But it's fun, it's playful. The first one is Groundhog Day meets Scream. The second one is apparently Groundhog Day meets Scream meets Back to the Future 2. It's like, okay, fine, I'm in. So I'm quite interested in checking that out. The reviews have been moderately positive, which is always a good sign when you get to these sorts of films. Much like sort of Escape Room a couple of weeks ago, where it's like, not everybody hated it. Therefore,
This-
it's worth a punt.
That's not where I see it. Not everybody hated this.
People are
I run a
shocked to see
mile.
it's not terrible.
Yeah.
But-
I like a good. Like
I'll
a
catch
good,
up on it
it's,
home
it's
in June.
Fun. Like the first one was fun and poppy, had a great performance from Jessica Roth, and a premise that, while not at all original, was at least playful and a nice way to spend 90 minutes, and an economic 90 minutes, to be honest, as well.
All right, fair enough.
All right then. Also out this week, Instant Family, Mark Wahlberg and Rose Byrne,
Oh, poor Rose Byrne. Good help her. I hope she got paid well.
and Octavia Spencer and Tig Notaro, which is quite an interesting combination as well. As the sort of comic supporting characters who seal the show, running the adoption agency. This is the story of, yes, it is. It is the story of two people who, as a husband and wife team, who, as a career, flip houses. They buy houses and then they renovate them and they sell them and make a profit on it. They decide through a series of events that essentially amount to one-upmanship and desperation to adopt not one child, but 3 children, immediately, and with minimal amount of time to think about it. What follows is a standard comedy of errors, where it's like, well, having kids is easier than we thought. Oh no, having kids is harder than we thought. Oh, maybe having kids is both hard and easy at the same time.
Have you seen it, right?
I have seen it.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Does Mark Wahlberg get the kids up at 2 a.m. when he starts his health routine or whatever the fuck he does?
Unfortunately, it doesn't go into
No.
whether or not he splits the hour of family time with meetings, and
Yeah,
that's
that's what I was
non-negotiable.
wondering,
Yeah. But yeah, no, it's very mid-tier. It's very generic. It's paint by numbers, and there are moments where it's not sure whether it's a comedy or whether it's a drama, and that really hurts it. There's a moment where like Rose Byrne has this big moment where they've got one of the kids who was taken in and fostered, and she's given a big inspirational speech, and it's inspired everybody. It's been like, well, this is what we can do if we do this well. And she goes to the kid's house, and she's like, she meets the parents, and she's like, well, where is your daughter? I would really use a big inspirational speech right now. And the parent of this child is like, well, she's actually checked herself back into rehab. And you get this big moment from Byrne, which amounts to, oh, that's just fantastic. This is just like, she was sold to us as this great, sort of hope. She was said to be this perfect kid, and she's just in rehab. How perfect is that? And it's like, wow, that's a horribly ill-judged moment. And the film, after giving you that moment, realizes how ill-judged it is and has another character slap Rose Byrne across the face. And it's like, it's never entirely sure whether it wants to pitch itself as an earnest family drama about like real important issues, or as a broad comedy about, well, these 2 people have found themselves in over their heads. Watch how they deal with it. It also over-explains its jokes, which I really hate. It has a really good joke about, The Blind Side, where there's a white woman at the adoption center who really wants to foster like a 16 to 18-year-old black guy who's very tall, very athletic, possibly plays football, that she could use in order to further her own dreams of like succeeding as a mentor figure, which is like, yes, very clearly spoofing The Blind Side, except the characters then spend 2 minutes talking about how that is the premise of The Blind Side, and that is the joke, in case you did not get that.
I think I'd rather pull out all my teeth than watch this.
I mean,
This mawkish.
Blindside is hardly
like-
current.
It's hip and with it. I know, but again, in the season where we're getting movies like Green Book, it's nice to...
Just let's avoid Mark Wahlberg films.
But-
Things seems to
Yeah.
be the thing here.
I mean, isn't this kind of doing a similar kind of outdated thing as the Green Book, just in a different way?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, it is. No, it absolutely is. It's, and particularly because they're adopting 3 kids from a Hispanic background as well. So it's a
Exactly.
mixed race blended family.
The fact
for them.
that Mark Wahlberg is in a mawkish, feel-good comedy about family and the conventional family unit coming together in an unconventional way
I feel like
Gee.
listeners can hear Luke's expression. through the,
collects a couple of
3 kids.
who I assume are good people.
Yes.
You could
If they're
pay me to watch
minorities,
this.
who would genuinely give Mark Wahlberg a minority kid, considering his past?
It's probably illegal.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, and that's it though. I mean, like, despite that, I do think that it's interesting how, like, even Mark Wahlberg films have reached a point where they're like, yeah, families can be unconventional and conventional at the same time.
I know.
Like, I mean, we reached that point of permeation where, like, The Fast and the Furious is, like, soaked down to Mark Wahlberg movies. Which is, not a comment on Mark Wahlberg, not an endorsement of Mark Wahlberg movies, more an endorsement of Fast and Furious films.
Yeah, the only way I'd believe this is if the American government assigned these kids to Mark Wahlberg by mistake and now aren't bothered to reunite them with their original family.
All right. Also out this week is Mech My Love, which is a teen boy coming back to his hometown during summer vacation in search of love in 1994.
Good for him.
Yes. And then finally, the other big release of the week is The Kid Who Would Be King, which actually screened as part of VimDiff earlier this
The
week. They had a
Fantastic Flicks,
special screening. Yeah.
It was today, wasn't it?
It was today. This was this morning. They had a free screening, I believe, for young people who are interested in cinema, which is great.
The trailer's dreadful. That's all I can say about it.
I'd quite like to see this because
That's-
they don't make them like this anymore.
That's it. Well, that's what I've heard. I've heard it's very much like along the lines of those 80s kind of family-friendly films, which you don't see these
Well,
days.
what
that aren't self-aware.
What Cornish kind of said, and is absolutely true, is the market for kind of kids, adventure and action series kind of films fell away because the kind of films that they were watching became about adults.
Yeah.
The adults didn't let go of those kind of films, and now there aren't films that are targeted toward kids in this way anymore. Maybe it won't be great, but I think there is a place for stuff like this. I was watching films like this all the way through the 90s, and now
Well, it reminds me a lot
you
of
don't get them anymore. And
The Clock with the House and Its Walls from late last year, which is not necessarily a great film, but I thought was quite like an affectionate throwback to the old Amblin sort of movies, you know?
how expensive is this? Because that's where I think I'm going to on these things.
As in, like, so do you have like an over-under sort of on this? Like, what is your threshold for you to be worried about this? What kind of budget are you kind of...
If
20 million?
If it's under 100 million.
It is under 100 million.
Okay, all right.
It's $59 million, apparently, is the reported budget for this.
As these things go, it's not bad. And it just goes to show, if you don't cast Jennifer Connelly for no reason, you can cut a few costs.
Soon to be 2-time Oscar winner Mahershala Ali as your mini boss villain.
I mean, in another year, this would be his Eddie Redmayne. They're all doing this.
Yeah,
they're all doing this, and you don't have to.
but
You
but
don't
again,
have to.
nothing in Alita Battle Angel is as fun as Eddie Redmayne.
When
in Jupiter
your
Ascending.
agent is telling you that you're getting an easy paycheck because they'll make 3 or 4 of these, like, look at what the thing is and know that that's not going to happen. So, like, come on.
All right, then. So I think that about wraps it up. But if people look for a bit more Luke, a bit more Jay, a bit more Ronan in their lives, where can they find you guys?
I'm at Mr. Cynical on Twitter, and I'm on filmindublin.ie.
At J Coyle on Twitter.
On Twitter at Darren Ronan.
I'm at Darren_Mooney. You can also listen to another podcast I co-host, which is the 250, which releases Saturday. And this weekend, I'm very excited, we have Sarah Hearn, who's the programmer for Fantastic Flicks,
awesome.
actually. And she's talking about The Kid, which is premiering in 1921.
The new Kid chapter,
apparently,
eh?
yeah. He's an up-and-comer, kids. One to watch. But yeah, it's screening at the Virgin Media Dublin International Film Festival on the 23rd of February,
and we'll
so
be
Saturday
there.
week, which I'm very, very, very excited about. So anyway, take it easy, guys. Bye.
Bye.